Welcome to Bounce Back Stronger, the podcast that explores ways to find peace and purpose no matter what happens. Today, we're diving into the power of yoga and meditation, especially when life throws us curveballs. Our guest, Kim Bernardo, is an expert in helping people find peace and courage in the face of loss. With certifications in grief yoga, trauma informed yoga, meditation, and yin yoga, Kim leverages her expertise and experience to guide her students to discover resilience and strength as they travel through the grieving process. Kim, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It is wonderful to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited for this.
It's good to have you here. We met through Instagram. Your handle is Travel Balanced.
Traveled and balanced. Yep.
And maybe just take a second to talk about where that came from. I'd love that.
Yeah. So a couple years ago, when I was trying to find out like what my niche was with yoga, I wanted to combine my love for travel and yoga all in one handle. So I started doing that when the pandemic happened, and then I kind of shifted about 2 years ago to grief yoga. So I figured I'd keep the handle because people already know it, and I still post my travels and stuff like that. So it kind of still works out.
Yeah, I think in a way too. I mean, we life is kind of a travel, right? We're having a journey. I think it still really applies. We want to travel through life in a balanced way.
That's a really good way to put it. That's a good way to think about it. I like.
Yeah, yeah. And we did an event, I think, around my first book on Instagram, which was great to do with you.
Yep.
And I resonate so well with your mission around, helping people through grief. Maybe spend them here so that everybody can understand how you came to this work.
Yeah, so I've been a yoga teacher for almost 8 years now, teaching in Rhode Island, all over the state, and I've been trying to find my niche for the past couple of years, but couldn't figure out what it was. In 2020, the end of 2020, my parents were diagnosed with different cancers. My mom diagnosed with kidney cancer, and my dad with esophageal cancer. They
Oh.
were diagnosed like maybe like 3 weeks apart, maybe even like a month. And so they ended up passing my mom 3 months later from that, and then my dad 6 months from that. So it was 3 months apart for the two of them. Yoga is like what saved me during that time. Yoga and meditation are the two things I turned to throughout that whole anticipatory grief. It was a lot to deal with, a lot of caregiving, needed some self-care and stuff like that. I'd go in the room for like 20 minutes and be like, all right, mom and dad, I gotta go do this. Need to
Mm.
take a little break. And even like if it was like a 5 minute meditation, like that reset everything for me to turn my thoughts around, my frustrations. If I was feeling a lot of burnout, I was working full time at the same time of caregiving as well. And those are the two things I turned to that really helped me. So about a year after my parents passed, there was a training for grief yoga, and I had just like been introduced to the book. I forget who introduced me to the book that Paul Denniston had written. And like a couple weeks later, I got an email about the training, and I was like, oh my God, I had never even knew that this was a thing. So I dove right in, mainly for my own practice to see like what it could offer me. And the transformation that I had in that training and afterwards really pushed me to want to share that with other people. It was just like a different avenue that like I had never considered before, that I love sharing with people, and I hear the same thing that people say like they never even knew it existed. So I'm glad that I can expose people to it and give them the tools to help them on their journey.
So that's an amazing story. And again, of course, I'm sorry for your loss. We've talked a bit about this over time. I think if you are going through loss, I think your Instagram is really, really helpful. You have a lot of really great resources and just allowing people to kind of express their feelings through this time, which is hard. And, it's a really, really difficult thing to have those types of losses in your life. And you're relatively young too. I think it's really hard when you're young.
Agreed, especially since like I don't really know anybody in my life who's lost even one parent, maybe even grandparents. Like a lot of my friends have even lost like more than one grandparent. Like it's like a weird thing to go through. Like yeah, I'm only 34 years old. Like, like it's so weird.
It is. If it's at all helpful, my dad died when I was 25, and it was really, really hard for me. I found though that I was there for my friends as it happened to them. And I kind of became the person that everybody went to when they had that experience. And it's funny, 30 years later, now I'm writing this book called Bounce Back Stronger to provide the things that I wish I had when my dad died. So I think it gives us this purpose, right? I think it's given you this purpose, which certainly I would have wished I had my father all these years, but I wouldn't have gone this route and done this work without it. So there is a lot of benefit to our lives, I think, as we go through these things and figure out the tools that help us.
I agree. It's like a weird, like I'm happy I found my niche, but like I'm also like sad that I had to go through this and they can't see this experience, you know?
I think they do, though. I think that's one of the things that I really feel. I don't know if you have that in your experience, but there's so many times I can tell that they're there with me and they leave me signs of being around. So
Yeah, those are so comforting. It's like
it is.
validating you're going through an experience and then you get that sign, you're like, all right, so, it validates a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe let's talk a little bit about grief yoga. What is grief yoga? That would be helpful, I think.
Yeah, so grief yoga uses yoga, movement, and breath and sound as well to release any suppressed pain that's in the body and any suffering also to kind of reconnect back to love. It's a gentle class that's designed to help grievers through their journey. I use the yoga and meditation. I combine the two within my classes as well.
And is movement so important in grief?
So pain gets suppressed in the body, either consciously or subconsciously. I think this isn't talked about enough, that it really needs to be expressed. A lot of people kind of push it down, grief in general, and it'll show up in different ways throughout your experience. You might have like aches and pains in the body or sleeping issues, insomnia, inflammation as well, like some things like that will just start to show up in the body. And when you start to express that suppressed pain in any sort of movement, not even just in yoga, you're working out, if you're going for walks, running, it just allows you to release just that heaviness in the body. I don't know how to explain it, but then other than the heaviness in the body, you feel a release afterwards. And you don't even realize sometimes, like until you do that exercise or workout, how much you're suppressing. And it will continue to happen over time. Our whole journey with grief is just constant memories and dates and anniversaries and events and stuff like that that they're missing out on that brings it up in the body, especially before a big event. We start to feel it in the body. Just give yourself that time to just let it release will feel amazing for the brain, the breath, for every part of your body.
Yeah, I entirely agree with that. What might a student expect when they go to a grief yoga class? Like, how is it set up? And because I think it's hard for people to access yoga for the first time anyway. And then if they're going through something, you're not yourself in a lot of ways. There's a whole internal dialogue that happens when you're grieving. So maybe just give them a little bit of reassurance of how this works.
So with grief yoga, it's set up in kind of like four different stages, but it flows all together. Like you don't even realize that the four stages are even happening. That's on my end to plan it that way. But in the beginning, there's gentle yoga to just start to warm up the body, warm up the spine 7 different ways. Then you move into like a part called the expression, which is like the breath work and the sound to begin to release that suppressed pain. Use techniques, kind of like punching out in front of you, pretending you're chopping wood with like your hands interlaced and just bringing your arms up and down. It's just different ways
Mm.
to kind of open up different parts of your body, the shoulders, the chest, the lungs, the throat, just different areas that suppressed pain starts to get released. And then we start to come back to like more meditative flows to kind of bring down the height of the class. It's still a very gentle class, but you kind of go into a point with those techniques where it kind of brings out more out of you emotionally, mentally, and not every single class either. Every class will be different. With those meditative flows, it kind of brings you back more inward to do a little self work. And then we go back into more yoga, which is more the restorative part. We just kind of hang out in poses for a little bit longer to kind of marinate in them and just settle what's happened, kind of go back to that inner work again and just kind of see what's come up. And then I like to end my classes also with a 15-minute guided meditation, just to have that extra 15 minutes to just completely relax. You just hang out in some bolsters and blankets, let yourself just go to sleep if you want to. I know it's a lot of work, so I know some people fall asleep and it's totally fine. lot. It's a compliment.
It is. It is the best compliment. There are certain postures that work really well in grief that you would recommend? Because there are probably quite a few people that are yoga students here, so they'll know some of these poses.
Yeah. So 3 that I can think of off the top of my head is child's pose. It's very grounding. You go down on the floor and you just kind of go inward. If you're in the middle of class and you feel yourself getting overwhelmed, or if you feel like you're gonna cry, you don't want anybody to see it. It's a good time to just kind of go to your knees, come down in child's pose and go inward until you're ready to come out of it. You can literally say the whole time in child's pose. And then tree pose, it's another one that helps calm and relax the mind and the nervous system. It also helps with concentration, which is also good for the grief brain, especially the early stages of grief, that grief brain that just kind of fogs up everything. This just allows you to have a little bit more clarity. And then forward fold helps you ground down to the earth and just let everything go. Just let the shoulders release. It's just a really good release for the lower back too. Some common areas grief gets suppressed. Anything gentle and restorative honestly will work. Something that just doesn't overwhelm the body and just allows you to move slow and just feel what the body is feeling and just let it express itself.
That's great. What are some other go-tos for you when you're having a day that's difficult in grief? Like what is your routine? Do you have something that you follow?
Yeah, it's probably more of like the same few things. So creative outlets really work for me, like creating art. I'm kind of into like doll houses right now. It sounds really weird, but like wooden doll
No, I
houses.
love that.
And it's kind of like let me go back to my childhood, I guess. But so like painting,
Hmm.
like designing them, and then they kind of just sit aside just to kind of admire. Just a different kind of outlet for me with my art. But I have gone to art classes and stuff like that since being on this grief journey. It's really helped me a lot. I always turn to like journaling and reading about grief too helps when I'm feeling really down, just to kind of get like validation of how I'm feeling and stuff like that. And always working out and doing yoga. That's like my number one thing I turn to is if that doesn't help, then the journaling is like afterwards. Usually the movement though, I kind of maybe even brings up like different parts of grief I didn't even realize I had going on, you know?
I don't know if you've read The Body Keeps the Score. It's very supportive to yoga. It talks a lot about how yoga releases so many feelings and repressed feelings, and not just grief, but things that, have happened to you in the past. And so a lot of breakthroughs can happen as a result of that. So like you said, there's things that you may not even realize that you were feeling or had impacted you in this way, and yoga will help you to release them.
Yeah. It's funny you brought that up. I have that on my nightstand for like the last year, but I keep forgetting. It's in a huge pile of books that I have to read. And I literally said to my husband 2 days ago, like, I need to read this book. It's gonna help me a lot with teaching and stuff like that, and just for my own knowledge. And it's funny you brought that up because it's like another sign of me like needing
It's
to
a
read.
sign. Yeah, my Reiki teacher would say your spirit guides are telling you to to pick that sucker up.
I have to like see, right?
I waited a long time on that one too. It was on my shelf for a long time, but I did really appreciate it. He talks also about dancing as being a really helpful activity, which I am a big believer in that. Every morning in the shower, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but every morning in the shower, I turn on the Al Jarreau playlist on Pandora, which is a very happy playlist, and I dance in the shower
I
because
love
I'm a big believer in stacking of things and I have to shower. So if I dance and put that music on, it puts me in a better mood immediately. So I found it really, really helpful. So dancing is a big one for releasing stress. Yeah.
Yes.
Have you leaned on a community through your grief journey? And then how has the community that you've developed through your grief yoga work impacted your journey?
Yeah, the Instagram grief community is like the best. Like that's where I
It
went
is.
immediately. That's how we met was through that.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
right.
It's just so supportive. There's no judgment, so much validation,
Mhm.
so many people, so you don't feel alone. That was like my number one thing when I first went through this was like, where the heck am I going to turn to? Especially during like COVID times. So that had led me to meet one of my really good friends. We text all the time. Like she lost her mom a few months after I lost my parents. So
Mhm.
we just get it. We just text each other
Mhm.
almost every day to just like kind of vent whatever we're going through. We check in on each other just to see how each other's grief is. But also in person, like the grief community I've kind of created over here in Rhode Island, it's just been really nice to be in a room full of people that just get it I don't have to like explain very much like I do with my friends about my grief and,
Mhm.
hearing people's grief story helps me with coping mechanisms that I can try and just different ways of just meeting people out here in Rhode Island has just been really, really helpful on this grief journey. It's just really nice to just kind of have that exchange of like helping each other out, you know?
Yeah, and I think giving to others when you can, if you're grieving, is really helpful. I don't recommend it unless you're really ready for it, but I
Yes.
find it's really helpful. It takes you out of yourself because it's easy to kind of get stuck in there inside. So yeah, I think that you found that too.
I totally agree. And like after my grief yoga classes, I usually take the night off to just kind of decompress. It's a lot. It's a lot of work that
Hmm.
take on the emotions in the class while I'm teaching, my own emotions too. Sometimes it can trigger things out of, especially if it's near like an anniversary or a big event my parents are gonna be missing out on. And then having that time after to decompress, I always remind my students at the end to take that time. It might not happen that night. It might happen a few weeks later that you feel the effects of the grief yoga just kind of coming over you and just to kind of give yourself that self-care afterwards. It's heavy work. It's worth
It
it.
is.
It's very heavy.
Yeah, it's really awesome that you do it. It's a big gift.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been really nice to help other people in this journey, you know.
So Kim, if anybody wanted to reach out to take classes with you, how would they do that?
Yep. So I'm on Instagram and Facebook as well at traveled and balanced. I have an email as well, traveled and balanced at gmail.com. Those are two ways you can reach out to me. And I do online classes once a month and in person probably about like 3 to 4 times a month.
It's great. Well, I'll have all those links in the show notes so
Oh,
that you can reach out and definitely follow Kim on Instagram. You've got the greatest grief memes. They're really, really helpful.
thank you.
And
Okay.
thank you so much for being with us today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I was very excited to do this, and I'm glad to be, reaching out to other people, just exposing them to the possibilities in their grief journey.
That's all for today. If you want to learn more about Kim or sign up for her classes, those links will be in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this episode was helpful. If it was, please subscribe, drop a review, or share it with your friends and family. That's the best way to get it in the hands of those who may benefit. And if my daughters, Sienna and Sylvia, are listening, I just want you to know how proud I am of you, and I love you so much. Bye now.